What would you do if the person who humiliated you every single day showed up at your house in the middle of a storm, helpless and crying? Most people would slam the door. You see, when Lucas looked down, he saw something that made him freeze. She wasn't wearing shoes. The richest woman in the city ran 4 miles barefoot just to get to him. If he lets her in, he risks his job. If he leaves her out, she might not survive the night. He has 5 seconds to decide, revenge or redemption. If this story resonates with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, Lucas and I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The silence on the 40th floor of Mercer Global wasn't peaceful, it was predatory. The air conditioning hummed with a sterile, Arctic chill that seemed designed to keep human bodies in a state of perpetual alertness. Lucas Bennett rubbed the grit from his eyes, the blue light of his dual monitors stinging his retinas. 9:15 p.m. He looked at the framed photo next to his keyboard. Sophie, his 6-year-old daughter, grinning with a missing front tooth, holding up a paint fingering. He was missing tuck-in time, again. The guilt settled in his stomach, heavier than the stale coffee he'd been nursing since noon. But the tuition bill for her school was due on Tuesday, and the rent on her 2-bedroom apartment in the city had just hiked up another 10%. He wasn't here for ambition. He was here for survival. Click, click, click. The sound of stilettos on marble cut through the quiet like a metronome counting down to an execution. Lucas stiffened, his posture automatically correcting itself. Thalia Mercer didn't walk, she glided, a weapon wrapped in designer silk. At 28, she was the youngest female CEO in the city, possessing a beauty that was breathtaking as it was terrifying. Her dark hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her eyes, a striking shade of gray, missed nothing. She stopped at his cubicle, not bothering to look at him, her gaze fixed on the tablet in her hand. "The Q3 projections, Bennett," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, and devoid of any warmth. Lucas handed her the file folder. "I finished the revisions you asked for at 5 p.m., Miss Mercer. I cross-referenced the Asian market data manually." Thalia flipped the folder open. She scanned the first page for 3 seconds before dropping it onto his desk. It landed with a dismissive thud. "The formatting on the executive summary is off, and the font size on the footnotes is inconsistent," she said, finally looking at him. Her expression was bored. "Fix it, and have the hard copy on my desk by 7 a.m. Lucas's jaw tightened. "Miss Mercer, I've been here until 10 every night this week. I haven't seen my daughter awake in 3 days. The data is accurate. Surely the font size can wait until—" "Do you want the job, Bennett?" The question hung in the air, sharp and cruel. She knew the answer. She knew he was a single father. HR would have flagged it. She knew he couldn't afford to walk away. Lucas swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. "I'll have it on your desk by 7 a.m. "Good." She turned on her heel, the scent of expensive jasmine and cold rain trailing behind her. As she walked away towards her massive corner office, Lucas watched her. To the world, she was a titan of industry, untouchable and perfect. But Lucas noticed something, a slight hesitation in her step, a tremor in her hand as she reached for her office door handle. She didn't look like a victor. She looked like someone walking into a cell. He hated her in that moment, but he also wondered what kind of darkness lived in a glass tower. Have you ever had a boss who didn't respect your time or personal life? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. Neither of them knew that in less than 6 hours, the glass walls would shatter and their worlds were about to collide in a way no spreadsheet could predict. The clock on Lucas's dashboard read 11:45 p.m. when he finally pulled into the cracked driveway of his small apartment complex. He hadn't finished the formatting. For the first time in 3 years, he had simply closed his laptop, walked out of the building, and chosen sleep over submission. He knew he'd likely be fired in the morning. The thought made his stomach churn with terror for Sophie's future, but his body was too numb to process it. Inside his dimly lit apartment, the air smelled faintly of lavender baby shampoo and leftover macaroni. It was cluttered, warm, and infinitely better than the glass mausoleum of Mercer Global. He peeked into Sophie's room, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest under a faded mermaid duvet. The sight was a balm to his frayed nerves. He didn't deserve this peace, not when he'd just gambled their livelihood, but he drank it in anyway. He poured himself a glass of tap water and leaned against the kitchen counter, the silence of the apartment finally letting the adrenaline fade into bone-deep exhaustion. Then it came. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't a confident, demanding rap. It was frantic, a desperate rattling of wood against the frame. Lucas froze. It was 12:15 a.m. No good news traveled at this hour. His first thought was the police. An accident. He moved to the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked through the peephole, but the hallway light was flickering, distorting the figure outside. He kept the chain latched and cracked the door 2 inches. "Who is it? It's past mid—" The words died in his throat. Thunder cracked outside, illuminating the hallway in a harsh flash of white light. Standing on his worn home sweet home welcome mat was Thalia Mercer. But it wasn't the Thalia from the office. The impermeable armor was gone. She was drenched. Her $1,000 silk blouse was plastered to her skin, her black pencil skirt ruined with mud splashes around the hem. Her hair, usually a severe helmet of perfection, hung in sodden ropes around her face, dripping onto the cheap linoleum of the hallway. But it was her eyes that stopped Lucas cold. The icy gray was blown wide with panicked adrenaline. She was trembling so violently her teeth were audibly chattering. "Miss Mercer?" Lucas whispered, confused, his brain unable to reconcile the image of his tyrant boss with this shivering wreck on his doorstep. How did you get my address?" Thalia opened her mouth, but only a ragged gasp came out. She looked past him, into the warm, messy sanctuary of his living room, like a starving animal looking at a feast. She didn't command, she didn't demand. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw a human being utterly stripped of defenses. I couldn't—" Her voice was a broken whisper devoid of its usual steel. She wrapped her arms around her, digging her fingernails into her wet sleeves. "I couldn't go home. It's too quiet there. Please." The mighty CEO of Mercer Global was begging her executive assistant to entry. The inversion of power was so sudden, so visceral, that Lucas felt vertigo. The anger he'd nursed for weeks, the resentment over missed bedtimes and humiliating demands, warred with the basic human instinct to help someone who was clearly drowning on dry land. The wind howled down the corridor, pushing her slightly forward. She flinched, her eyes pleading. "Please, Lucas," she choked out, using his first name for the very first time. "Don't leave me out here." Lucas undid the chain latch. The metal slid across the track with a scrape that sounded too loud in the quiet building. He swung the door open, not out of hospitality, but out of a desperate need to get the spectacle out of the hallway before a neighbor looked out. "Come in," he said, his voice rough. Thalia stepped over the threshold, bringing the smell of ozone and wet pavement with her. As soon as the door clicked shut, cutting off the wind, the reality of the situation crashed into the small entryway. She stood next to the shoe rack, overflowing with Sophie's bright pink sneakers and muddy rain boots. In the office, Thalia Mercer was a giant. Here, in the yellow light of his 60-watt bulb, she looked small, fragile. A puddle of rainwater formed instantly around her expensive heels, soaking into Lucas's fraying welcome mat. Lucas stayed by the door, his hand still gripping the knob as if he might need to escape his own apartment. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a defensive wall of wariness. "Is your driver downstairs?" Lucas asked, glancing at the window where the storm was battering the glass. "I can walk you down with an umbrella." Thalia flinched as if he'd slapped her. She shook her head, water flying from her hair. "No driver. I walked." "You walked?" Lucas stared at her. "From the financial district? That's 4 miles, Miss Mercer. In a storm?" "I needed the noise," she whispered, her eyes darting around the apartment, refusing to meet his. She hugged her torso tighter, her knuckles white. The penthouse. The soundproofing. It was too quiet. I couldn't hear anything but... She trailed off, her jaw clamping shut. Lucas hardened his heart. He looked at the woman who had threatened his job 3 hours ago, the woman who made him miss Sophie's school play last Tuesday. He didn't have the emotional bandwidth for a billionaire's existential crisis. "I'm sorry you're having a bad night," Lucas said, his tone stiff, retreating into professionalism as a shield. "But you can't be here. I have a 6-year-old sleeping in the next room. I'm going to call you a car." He reached for his phone on the side table. "No." Thalia lunged forward, her hand gripping his forearm. Her skin was ice cold, shocking him. She pulled back instantly, horrified by her own lack of boundaries. "Please, no cars, no calls. If the board finds out I'm unstable, the stock drops. You know the protocol." "I don't care about the stock," Lucas snapped, pulling his arm away. "I care about the fact that I'm supposed to be finishing a report for you right now so I don't get fired at dawn, remember?" Thalia looked at the kitchen table. There, under the singular light, was his laptop and stacks of papers, her papers. The red ink of her corrections looked violent against the white sheets. She looked back at him, and for a second the CEO mask tried to slide back into place. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. I didn't realize you worked from home." "I don't," Lucas said, his voice low and dangerous. "I work from the office. I sleep here, or I used to, before you decided sleep was optional." The air between them crackled. She wanted to flee. He wanted to kick her out. But the storm outside hammered against the building with a renewed violence, shaking the window frames. A flash of lightning turned the room white, followed instantly by a boom of thunder that rattled the floorboards. Thalia gasped, squeezing her eyes shut, her hands flying to her ears. She crumpled, sinking down onto the cheap wooden bench in his entryway, shaking uncontrollably. Lucas watched her, his hand hovering over the door lock. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to be the employee who stood up for himself. But looking at the shivering, terrified woman huddled next to his daughter's rain boots, he knew he was trapped. He couldn't throw her out into that. "Take off the shoes," Lucas sighed, the fight draining out of him. "You're ruining the rug." "Bathroom is the second door on the left," Lucas muttered, rummaging through his dresser drawer. He pulled out a gray heather hoodie and a pair of flannel pajama pants. "These are clean. It's the best I can do. I don't have guest clothes." Thalia took the bundle of fabric like it was a sacred offering. She was still shivering, her teeth clicking together in a rhythm that made Lucas wince. She disappeared into the bathroom, and the lock clicked with the decisive snap. Lucas exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He walked into the kitchen, a narrow galley space that barely fit 2 people, and put the kettle on. The blue flame of the gas stove hissed, the only sound in the apartment besides the relentless rain hammering the roof. He leaned against the counter, staring at his reflection in the dark window. "What are you doing, Bennett? This is professional suicide." But the image of her eyes, wide, gray, and terrified, wouldn't leave his mind. The bathroom door creaked open. Lucas turned and felt the breath hitch in his throat. Thalia Mercer, the woman who wore Italian suits like armor, was now drowning in his old university hoodie. The sleeves hung past her fingertips, the pants pooled around her bare feet. Without the heels and the power suit, the illusion of her invincibility evaporated. She looked young, painfully young. She walked into the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, stepping carefully around Sophie's scattered Lego blocks as if they were landmines. "Tea," Lucas said, breaking the silence. He placed the chipped mug on the coffee table. "It's chamomile. It helps, with the quiet." Thalia sat on the edge of his worn beige sofa. It sagged under her weight, a stark contrast to the ergonomic leather chairs at Mercer Global. She picked up the mug with both hands, letting the steam hit her face. "Thank you," she whispered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound exhaustion. Lucas didn't sit next to her. He took the armchair opposite, maintaining the line of separation. For a long time, the only sound was the storm and the soft slurp of tea. Then Thalia's gaze drifted to the kitchen table behind him. She stared at the stacks of paper, the Q3 projections. She saw the red marker slashes she had made hours ago. In the sterile light of her office, those red marks were just corrections. Here, under the warm glow of Lucas's lamp, next to a bowl of half-eaten cereal and a child's permission slip, they looked violent. She saw a sticky note attached to his monitor. "Dad, wake me up for kiss before you work. Soph." Thalia's eyes watered. She looked at the time on the microwave, 1:15 a.m. "You were going to work all night," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "I didn't have a choice. My boss is very demanding." Thalia flinched. She looked down at the mug in her hands, tracing the chipped rim. "I didn't know you had a daughter." "It's in my HR file, page 1. "I never look at the files," Thalia admitted, her voice hollow. "I only look at the numbers." The lights flickered overhead, buzzing ominously before steadying. The apartment felt suddenly smaller, the space between them charged with an awkward intimacy. They were no longer Priscilla and assistant. They were two people trapped in a box while the world tried to drown them outside. "Why here, Thalia?" Lucas asked, dropping the title. The shift in address made her head snap up. "You have a fleet of cars. You have hotels. Why my door?" Thalia looked at him, and the mask slipped completely. "Because," she said, her voice trembling, "you're the only person in that entire building who looks me in the eye when I speak. Everyone else just looks at the title." The confession hung in the air, fragile as smoke. "You're the only one who looks me in the eye." Lucas stared at her, the resentment in his chest slowly untying itself. He sat back in the armchair, the leather creaking softly. "That's a low bar, Thalia, even for a CEO. "It's October 15th, she whispered, ignoring his comment. She was staring into the dark tea, watching the steam rise. 3 years ago today, my father died, in the penthouse. He had a heart attack right at his desk." Lucas went still. The legendary Arthur Mercer, the Titan. "I was in London," she continued, her voice devoid of inflection, which made it all the more heartbreaking. "By the time I landed, the board had already drafted the press release. They didn't give me time to grieve. They just handed me his seat. They told me, 'Don't let the stock wobble, Thalia. Be him.'" She looked up at Lucas, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I've been trying to be him for 3 years. I shout, I demand, I push people until they break, because I'm terrified that if I stop, everyone will see I'm just a fraud. I'm not a titan, Lucas. I'm just the girl who wasn't there when her dad died." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the heavy silence of truth. Lucas looked at the woman huddled in his oversized hoodie. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a daughter paralyzed by the weight of a ghost. "I know what it's like," Lucas said quietly, "to feel like you have to be everything for everyone." Thalia tilted her head, studying him. "Your wife?" "She didn't die," Lucas said, his voice tightening. He looked towards Sophie's bedroom door. "She left 2 years ago, said she couldn't handle the mediocrity of this life. Said she wanted more than a husband who was content being an analyst." He clasped his hands together, his knuckles white. "So I took the job at Mercer Global. I worked the overtime, I swallowed the insults. Not because I'm ambitious, Thalia, but because I have to prove to Sophie, and maybe to myself, that I can provide a good life. I'm terrified that if I fail, I lose my daughter too." Dahlia's eyes widened. She looked at the cheap apartment, the warmth, the toys, the care in every corner. "You think this is mediocrity?" she whispered. "Lucas, this is everything I don't have." She reached out, her hand hesitating before covering his clenched fist on the coffee table. Her skin was warm now. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time it wasn't a corporate apology. "I made you feel small so I could feel big. I was wrong. Lucas looked down at her hand covering his. The barrier between boss and employee had dissolved completely. We're both just trying to survive the night, muttered Lucas. Yeah, she breathed, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. Just the night. Sunlight filtered through the cheap blinds, casting stripes of dust motes dancing in the air. The storm had broken, leaving behind a crisp, golden morning. Lucas stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching his living room. Thalia Mercer, net worth $4.2 billion, was curled up on his lumpy beige sofa, drooling slightly onto a throw pillow that smelled like popcorn. One of her feet stuck out from under the blanket, still clad in the oversized flannel pants. It was the most surreal thing he had ever seen, and dangerously the most domestic. "Daddy?" Lucas spun around. Sophie stood there in her mermaid pajamas, clutching a stuffed bear, eyes wide as she pointed at the sofa. "Why is there a lady in your hoodie?" Thalia stirred. She groaned, stretching, and her hand hit the coffee table. Her eyes snapped open, panic flashing for a microsecond before she recognized the peeling paint of the ceiling. She sat up, hair wild, rubbing her face. "Oh," she croaked. "Morning." "Hi," Sophie said, stepping closer, absolutely fearless. "I'm Sophie. You look like a potato." Lucas choked on his coffee. "Sophie, that's Miss Mercer. She's my boss." Thalia looked down at the baggy gray sweat swallowing her frame. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. A smile that didn't reach for approval or dominance. "She's right, Lucas. I do look like a potato." Sophie giggled. "Do potatoes eat pancakes? Because Daddy makes the best pancakes." 20 minutes later, the kitchen was a disaster zone of flour and eggshells. Thalia, it turned out, had never cracked an egg in her life. She stood by the stove holding the spatula like it was a hostile negotiation partner, while Sophie instructed her on the art of flipping. "It's all in the wrist," Sophie commanded, standing on a chair. Thalia bit her lip, focusing harder on the sizzling batter than she ever had on a board meeting. She flipped it. The pancake landed half-folded, looking sad and mangled. "Nailed it," Thalia deadpanned. Laughter erupted in the small kitchen, not polite corporate chuckles, but real belly-shaking laughter. Lucas watched them, his daughter and his boss, high-fiving over a ruined breakfast. He felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with stress. It was the ache of a void being filled. Watching Thalia wipe flour off her cheek, her eyes bright and alive, he realized how beautiful she was. Not the icy statue on the 40th floor, but this woman, the one who ate burnt pancakes and listened to Sophie ramble about sea turtles with rapt attention. "You're good with her," Lucas said quietly as Sophie ran off to find her shoes. Thalia leaned against the counter, the smile fading into something softer, sadder. "I'm not. I'm terrified of kids, but she makes it easy to just be." She looked at him, and the air shifted. The distance between them had vanished. "Thank you, Lucas, for the hideout. I haven't slept that well in 3 years." "You can hide out here any time," Lucas said, the words slipping out before he could check them. For a second, the world stopped. There were just a man and a woman in a sunlit kitchen, staring at the possibility of something more. Then, a pocket buzzed. Thalia stiffened. She reached into her discarded blazer on the chair and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up with 20 missed calls and a barrage of notifications. "It's Monday," she whispered, the light dying in her eyes. "My driver's downstairs. Security tracked my phone." The bubble didn't just pop, it shattered. The elevator ride to the 40th floor was silent. Thalia stood in the front, staring at the steel doors. She was back in her armor, a sharp navy suit, hair pulled back so tight it pulled at her temples, heels clicking a rhythm of war. Lucas stood behind her. He wanted to reach out, to squeeze her hand, to whisper a joke about pancakes to break the tension, but the air around her had frozen over. The woman who had slept on his couch in a hoodie was gone. When the doors slid open, the chaos hit them. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the bullpen. The driver had talked. The CEO, the assistant, the same car. Falia's spine stiffened. She walked straight to her office, barking orders. "Get legal on the line. Cancel my lunch. Bennett in my office, now." Lucas followed her in, closing the heavy glass door. He expected her to exhale, to drop the act. Instead, she moved behind her massive mahogany desk, putting a fortress between them. She didn't sit. She stood, gripping the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. "The rumors are already starting," she said, her voice brittle. "The board is asking questions about my stability, about my judgment." "Falia, it was one night," Lucas said, stepping forward. "We can explain." "There is no we, Mr. Bennett," she snapped. The formality hit him like a physical blow. She opened a drawer and slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a transfer order. "I'm moving you," she said, her eyes fixed on the window behind him, refusing to look at his face. "Down to data entry on the 4th floor. It's a pay cut, but the hours are better. You'll have more time with your daughter." Lucas stared at the paper. The 4th floor. The basement of the corporate world. It wasn't a transfer. It was an exile. "You're firing me?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "After I let you into my home? After I introduced you to my daughter?" "I'm protecting the company," Thalia yelled, finally looking at him. Her eyes were wet, panicked, but her face was a mask of stone. "I cannot have an assistant who is a distraction. I cannot afford to be seen as weak, Lucas. This weekend was a lapse in judgment, a mistake." A mistake. The word hung there, sucking the oxygen out of the room. Lucas felt something break inside him. He realized then that the class divide wasn't just about money. It was about who could afford to be human. He had given him his humanity, and she was treating it like a liability on a balance sheet. "A mistake," Lucas repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. He didn't pick up the transfer paper. "I don't need the transfer," he said, turning to the door. "And I don't need people like you in my life. I quit." Do you think Falia is protecting herself, or did she just use Lucas? Let me know in the comments below. He walked out. He didn't look back. And for the first time in 3 years, Falia Mercer sat in her perfect office, surrounded by her billions, and felt completely, utterly poor. The silence in the apartment that night was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with anxiety. Lucas sat at the kitchen table, the glow of his laptop screen illuminating his tired face. But instead of spreadsheets, he was scrolling through help-wanted listings, junior analyst, data entry, night shift warehouse. He had $400 in his checking account. Rent was due in 6 days. "Daddy?" Sophie stood in the hallway, clutching her bear. "Is the potato lady coming for dinner?" Lucas closed his eyes, a sharp pang of grief hitting him. It wasn't just the job. He missed the feeling of being seen. For a few hours, he hadn't been a machine. He'd been a man. "No, Soph," he said, his voice thick. "She's busy. She has a very big job." "Oh," Sophie said, looking down. "I made her a drawing of a potato princess." She placed a crinkled piece of paper on the table and shuffled back to bed. Lucas looked at the drawing, a lumpy circle with a crown and a big smile. He put his head in his hands. He had his dignity, yes, but dignity didn't pay for insulin or school shoes. He wondered if he had made a mistake, if he should have just taken the demotion. Across the city, the 40th floor was perfectly still. Thalia sat at her desk. The lights were dimmed. The Q3 report lay in front of her, perfect, formatted, flawless. The board was happy. The stock was up 2%. She had won. But the silence was screaming at her. She looked at her reflection in the glass window. She saw her father's suit, her father's office, her father's life. A life spent climbing a mountain only to realize there was no air at the top. She reached into her pocket. Her fingers brushed against something hard and plastic. She pulled it out. It was a small, pink Lego block. She must have picked it up when she was cleaning up the living room with Sophie. A tiny, insignificant piece of plastic. But holding it, she felt a warmth she hadn't felt in the boardroom in 10 years. I cannot afford to be seen as weak. That's what she had told Lucas. But looking at the empty chair outside her glass wall, the chair where Lucas had sat for 3 years, protecting her, fixing her mistakes, enduring her temper, she realized the truth. She wasn't strong. She was a coward hiding behind a paycheck. Lucas, with his empty bank account and his fierce love for his daughter, was the strongest person she had ever met. She stood up. The leather chair rolled back with a soft whoosh. She picked up the Q3 report and dropped it in the trash bin. "I'm done being him," she whispered to the empty room. She grabbed her coat. She didn't call her driver. She didn't call security. She grabbed her keys and walked out of the office, leaving the lights on. She had a negotiation to make, and for the first time, she was prepared to lose everything to win. Lucas was halfway through an application for a graveyard shift at a distribution center when the knock came. It wasn't the frantic, desperate pounding of Friday night. It was steady, confident. 3 solid raps. Lucas froze. He looked at the clock. 9 p.m. He walked to the door, his heart doing a traitorous flip in his chest. He opened it. Thalia stood there. No rain this time, no hoodie, but no power suit either. She was wearing jeans and a simple white sweater. She looked normal, and she was holding a pizza box. "I'm told," she started, her voice unwavering but soft, "that you can't have a negotiation on an empty stomach." Lucas blocked the doorway, his hand tight on the frame. "I don't work for you anymore, Thalia. You can't order me to negotiate." "I know," she said. She didn't try to push past him. She stood her ground. "I'm not here as your boss. I'm here as the woman who acted like a coward because she was scared of how much she needed you." Lucas's resolve wavered. He looked at her eyes, clear, honest, and pleading. "You fired me," he reminded her. "I tried to push you away," she corrected, "because you saw me, and that terrified me more than any shareholder meeting ever could." She took a step closer. "I tore up your resignation, Lucas, but I'm not asking you to come back as my assistant." Lucas frowned. "Then what do you want?" "I want a partner," she said. "I fired the VP of operations an hour ago. He was the one spreading the rumors. The position is open. It pays double, and it comes with a strict 9 to 5 policy." Lucas stared at her. "You're offering me a VP role to silence me?" "No," Thalia said, and for the first time she reached out and touched his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "I'm offering it because you're the only person who knows how to run that place with a heart. And," she took a deep breath, "I don't want to spend another night in that penthouse alone. I want to know if potatoes eat pizza." A small voice piped up behind Lucas's legs. "Potatoes love pizza." Lucas looked down. Sophie was peeking around his knee, eyeing the box. He looked back at Thalia. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by hope. She was risking it all, her pride, her control, for this moment. Lucas stepped back, opening the door wide. "Come in," he said, a smile finally breaking through. "But you have to explain the toppings to the management." Thalia stepped inside, the warmth of the apartment swallowing her up. She knelt down to Sophie's level, handing over the pizza. Then she looked up at Lucas, her eyes shining. "Deal," she whispered. And as the door clicked shut, shutting out the city, the cold, and the loneliness, Lucas knew the real work wasn't the job. It was this. building a life where they didn't have to hide from the storm because they had become each other's shelter. If you were Lucas, would you have forgiven Thalia? Subscribe for more stories about love, redemption, and second chances. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas Bennett to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So subscribe. Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.